Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Faiza Munshi on this ITV Exclusive doing the 16 days of activism of no violence against women and children. Today, the 25th of November, marks the first day of this campaign. It's a 16-day campaign that comes up every single year. And it ends on the 10th of December, which is Human Rights Day. And today we start off this campaign because every single year, I guess people look at the amount of violence there is against women and children and feel that there needs to society and communities need to galvanize in terms of trying to make a difference and talk about the issues surrounding women and children. So on today's program, I'm going to be introducing my guests, and we're going to be talking about this, the violence against women and children from many aspects, from many angles, and hopefully be able to highlight a lot of issues that face communities and society at large. I'd like to introduce my guests first of all. Assalamu alaikum, Anisa.
Wa alaikum salam, Faiza, and to Aisha.
Anisa is of the Islamic Care Line, and she's the Chief Social Worker and has been there for many years. Anisa, welcome to the program. Aisha, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
And Aisha is of the Daily Vox. Now, these two, assalamu alaikum to both of you once again. And in terms of the program today, we were having quite a chat earlier on as we prepared for the program, but this 16 days of activism has started like a few years ago. I'm not sure, Anisa, if you were involved when it just started coming up.
I think, I've been at the care line for so long that sometimes I lose track of the time. But what's important to note is that it's a campaign internationally that's been going on for the last 25 years, and in South Africa in particular for the last 16. And even though so much time has passed, I think we as a society, as a community, as even a group of people, even as women on our own, there's still so much we need to be doing, not just for generations past, women today in their most productive years, and even girls growing into the role of being future women, future leaders. I think there's so much that we still need to be doing.
We'll definitely talk a lot about that, but in terms of your work, so that the viewers know, who they're looking at and what they're listening to, just give us a brief overview of who you are, what you do at the Islamic Care Line, just briefly in terms so people know, what angle you're coming from.
Okay, I'm a qualified social worker by profession. The Islamic Care Line has been in existence for the last 25 years. Started out to address social problems in the Muslim community, one of the first faith-based organizations. And I must say, alhamdulillah, I've been fortunate enough to be part of its growth process. But we focus a lot on therapeutic processes, working with whether it be individuals, families. One of the primary objectives of the Islamic Care Line was women empowerment back then. But we've become a lot family focused as well, because you can't work with a woman without working with her family, with the children, and with men, more importantly. So there has to be the inclusion of the family unit. And unfortunately with that, there's the positive that we've managed to work with the other groups like men and children. But on the flip side, if I were to say that we've also seen a great deal of increase in the prevalence of marital breakdown, family breakdown, trauma, substance abuse. So there's been a wide scale of social problems that needed attention. And so, we've had to work with different groups in the process. And abuse falls in the center of it, no matter what the nature of that kind of abuse, whether it be physical, emotional, verbal, sexual even. And basically that brings us to where we are at now today.
Definitely. Aisha, welcome to the program. In terms of 16 days of activism as well, how were you introduced to it, and also what do you do, and what is the angle that you'd be speaking from on today's program?
Well, I think a lot of people criticize 16 days of activism for being a campaign that is only 16 days long, when in fact, as much as that could be a valid criticism, we should think about how, women and children and victims of abuse are usually a very marginalized group in society as it is. And the aim of this campaign, more than anything else, is just to draw focus to that and to implore people to pay attention to what a growing issue this is in society, what a prevalent issue it remains and always has been. And a lot of the time there's a lot of taboo attached to it, and so it's really nice that a campaign like this is in existence, kind of, to highlight the fact that this isn't going away. If anything, it's getting worse.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so in terms of my own background, I am currently a journalist. I work for the Daily Vox, which is an online news site I have since its inception. I'm also a master's student at the University of the Witwatersrand. I'm doing my master's in media studies. And my research interests have always been around Islam and gender and these things. And at the Daily Vox, we have a very kind of it's part of our mandate to focus on issues of the marginalized. And so, just coming back to 16 Days of Activism, it's kind of always on our radar to highlight the fact that women are always, victims in a lot of situations in society generally, not just in our own Muslim community.
Definitely.
And so, I'll just kind of, more than anything else, be speaking about the fact that these are issues that, they're not new, and they're not here for 16 days only. They're issues that we're dealing with all the time.
Okay. Now, Anisa, in terms of doing this, saying, okay, we're doing this for 16 days. We're going to be speaking about this, and the entire country is going to be listening about these 16 days. Does it also give people a chance to actually pay attention for a bit? Because I think sometimes, if I may say so, and you can disagree with me, but when you talk about something daily, we become desensitized. We look at the issues of war, we look at the issues that are surrounding us. It's so prevalent that there's so much of violence. There's so much of hurt, like pain in the world at the moment, that we almost become insensitive to it until sometimes something really radical happens, and then we notice. So in some ways, does the 16 days just jerk people and get them to see the pictures and see it for what it is, look at the stats and start listening to radio programs and media and saying, oh my goodness, is that how bad it's gotten? Or is this still going on in this day and age? Does the 16 days then just, get people to pay attention a little bit?
Faiza, I think what you're asking me is about impact. Are we making the impact, and are we getting the message across
in those
as
days,
loudly
yes,
as we should be? I'd really like to think so. But I think for me, the 16 days of activism represents a solidarity that people together all over the world recognize that there's a need to be paying attention to something as important as this. And yes, we're going to get people who are going to say, wow, I didn't realize it was so bad, and it's something that I need to participate in or take responsibility for or be involved in. And there's going to be lots of other people who look at it as, it doesn't involve me. I don't experience abuse. I don't see it happening around me. But even that is an area of concern, because it becomes everybody's responsibility.
Certainly. Now, on that point, what Anisa is saying, I mean, that's where the media kind of comes in. So in terms of your work at the Daily Vox, how would you then say, okay, you know what? We, on these 16 days of activism, would make sure that people understand that women are being physically abused to a point where we really need to stand up. It's not acceptable, whether you are a Muslim woman, whether you're non-Muslim woman, whoever you are in society. Women and children need to be protected. So how do you, in your work, in what you do, how do you highlight this and say, you know what, can people stand up and listen?
Faiza, I think with any kind of solidarity campaign or awareness campaign, there's always that hope that you'll, reach the people that you're trying to get the message across to. I mean, because a lot of the time you don't want it to be that you're talking in a vacuum,
Certainly.
where the three of us are all in agreement that, violence against women is wrong, and we're all just sitting here passionately agreeing about it. And so, the main aim, the way that you kind of navigate that is you look at the way that you're putting your message across. You're putting it across in such a way that people have no choice but to look up and listen. And I mean, not just the media space that I belong to, but generally, I think in mainstream media there is a lot more room for people to be highlighting these stories, for other members of the media to be, putting more of a focus on the way that this is an issue, not just in these 16 days, but generally throughout their coverage. At the Daily Vox specifically, I'm talking in very general terms,
yes,
but the way that, we would try and put the story across is look at varied perspectives. So look at what people from different faiths, faith-based organizations would have to say we do a lot of, we call them as told tos, where one-on-one interviews with survivors who come forward and share their own stories. Because a lot of the time we find that, if I'm giving you 3 stats and just saying to you violence is bad, you're hearing me, but
you're not really hearing me, right?
It's not as impactful, as sharing, a very emotional, true story.
A true story, yes, of course. It's like sharing a story about, for example, I mean, obviously Syria's all over in the media. It's like saying to somebody, this has happened, and then you see the pictures, and that impact just hits you. It hits you in a place where you think, how do people even survive this kind of pain? And even though we look at other countries, we have to look at our own country and say, you know what, there's pain like this all over, unfortunately, behind closed doors, and within homes, and within even, I mean, everyone that needs to be taken care of, especially kids. And I think that's where it hurts us most, is that kids need to be looked after and protected, but that's not happening, unfortunately. And we'll talk more about that after our break. We're going to look at issues of role and also in terms of how do we sustain development in terms of making a difference of keeping children and women away from violence. And so we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll discuss more on the activism, the campaigns, and violence against women and children. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to this ITV exclusive on the 16 days of activism of no violence against women and children. My name is Faiza. I'm with my guests, Anisa and Aisha. Anisa, Aisha, we've been discussing very interestingly in terms of 16 days of activism, where it came from, why it's there. But I think there's so many angles that we could take to this discussion. And in terms of looking at activism against women and children, how do we, in terms of these issues of activism, I shall probably come to you here. I mentioned Syria just before the break. We talk about women and children in our own communities, in our own societies. How do we just, more than just us, it's not just our own little cocoon, how do we start caring about what's happening in our neighborhood, to our neighbors, to those further away from us, and then also in different countries?
I'm really glad you're bringing this up, Faiza. Islam really orders us to be cognizant of justice and to do what we can to attain justice in whatever spaces that we're in, and even if we recognize injustice in spaces that we're not in, to call it out and do what we can to fight for that. And we see a lot of that with alhamdulillah, the solidarity that we display for Palestine, for example, and a lot of other places where we see Muslim brothers and sisters, and just general members of humanity being oppressed by other forces. And it's really good that we're doing that, but you sometimes have to ask yourself, why is it necessary to be exclusive in terms of where I'm fighting for the attainment of justice? If I can speak from the student movement perspective, that's currently very prevalent in South Africa. Something big that the movement is advocating for is also the advancement and attainment of equality and justice for women, just generally in society, and also within student movement spaces. And I'm paraphrasing now, but there's a poem where someone said, let's give it up for Comrade X, who addressed a crowd of students and then went home and beat his wife. And again, we can apply the same thing to, when we're talking about Syria and Palestine and ourselves and our own community. What is the point of you, tweeting free Palestine, or, thinking shame for the people in Palestine or whatever, when we're still exhibiting, clear signs of being unjust towards the women around us. Yes. Okay. And so, that's why something firm that I like to talk about a lot amongst the people I know is the concept of intersectionality, which is basically saying, struggles don't exist in isolation from one another. So while you're advocating for one cause or one campaign, what's to say that one has more weight than the other? Yeah. So in terms of our attainment of justice, there's no way that you can only be supportive of one cause and not of another, because then it's kind of like, how does that make you a human rights justice warrior or whatever it is?
Right, Anisa, coming to you in terms of, we're bringing it home now. How much of this do you see in terms of you, let's be honest about what is going on in the Muslim community, because I think that's something that we also need to hear about on today's program. Is we're talking about violence against women and children. We want to know, is this and how prevalent is this in Muslim communities? With the Islamic Care Line, you're going to be you're basically one of the very few faith-based organizations dealing with issues like this. Trauma, neglect, abuse, it comes straight to you. And how much of this are you seeing? What are the, we really need to understand, is this really happening? Are people getting beaten up in their own homes? Are kids being abused? Is there that issue of sexual abuse, physical abuse really happening that's so rife behind, it's obviously behind closed doors, but how rife is it and how much of this is impacting human beings, women and children in general? I mean, specifically actually.
Okay, I think, as Aisha was speaking, what came to mind for me is the element of ownership. And I think, and you'll hear when I give you my answer, the kind of background that I come from a therapeutic background, is that it's less threatening for someone to say, I'll focus on Syria, I'll focus on Palestine, it's far away, it's a humanitarian cause, right? But bringing it close to home and acknowledging and saying that I need to take ownership or responsibility for what's going on in my immediate environment, including and even within my home, within my neighborhood. So, you get those heroes in a way who need to say, I'm doing something important out there, but I choose not to see it in my own environment. And again, then when we look at us as Muslims, for a long time we'll say, okay, I'd rather keep it quiet because what impression will I give to the outside world that, what abuse is going on amongst us Muslims. But I think what the strongest statement that makes is that we rather, if we condone it and we keep quiet about it, then what does that say about us as Muslims, right? So going then back to your question about the prevalence, yes, it is increasing. Now, I don't know if I can safely say it's increasing or it always was there, but because it was just so hushed.
That's what we always say.
And now because marital breakdown is becoming more and more rife and people are coming forward with it, people are dissolving their marriages for different reasons, it's almost becoming a little bit more acceptable. But when we talk about abuse or we talk about violence, it could manifest in so many different ways, whether it be anyone not being able to control their anger and not having coping mechanisms, constructive and healthy, or we talk about learned behavior where I saw my parents interact a certain way, or because my father maybe raised his voice at my mom. And I'm not saying that abuse only takes place in one direction, but I am saying is that sometimes people have learned behavior and so it's become acceptable. So whether it be inability to cope with their emotions, whether it be socialized behavior, whether it be children observing their parents even then as children and then going out to school and abusing their fellow schoolmates in some way, or threatening them, or forcing them to steal. And we talk about bullying, and we're talking about abusive behavior in whether it be, like I said, whether it be emotionally, whether it be verbally, whether it be even sexually, and whether children are seeing things that they shouldn't be seeing, or being exposed to things that they shouldn't be exposed to, or where there's no boundaries or control, or there's no. So, when you ask me a question like that, again, we can go off on a tangent and bring in so many things. And again, it's also this issue around gender roles, for example, and the competitive relationship between men and women, or the elements of feeling threatened, or power struggles. But all of those lead then to some kind of dysfunction, unhealthy, unconducive, unfavorable home environments, where when Islam once taught us about, or not once, still teaches us to respect each other, to live in harmony with each other, to be amicable to the people that we love. And unfortunately, we find people hurting their loved ones most, and then going back again then to the issue of Syria and Palestine and saying that I will treat the outside person better, but the people living in my own home, I can be as, whether you want to call it being rude or vile or aggressive as I choose to be.
I think it comes down to the fact that when people have an sort of a view of themselves, they have this idea that I am this good person. Everyone sees me as good. I give out in charity. I go to the masjid, for example. I'm just using it as an example in terms of men. I go to the masjid, I pray my salah, I dress a certain way, and so I am a good person. So what I do behind closed doors is no one else's business. And I think that also becomes an issue of how is it that you speak to your children? How is it that you speak to the spouse? And from that, I mean, of course, it's a slow process, but how do I speak to them? How do then they respond? How do I react to that? And that anger and that reaction starts building up over time. And then you have that where you see the true nature of people come out in their own homes, which must be pretty scary for little ones growing up. And we'll talk later about, positive socialization of children, hopefully, and give that spin on the program in terms of how can we actually put that positive spin and socialize them in ways that are just so good, especially our little boys, How do we do that and how do we get a new generation going? But Aisha, I want to put you on the spot in terms of media. And of course, there's always the question of, in terms of, you talk a lot about patriarchy, we talk about, and it's in every society. It's not even Muslim-based, it's not culture-based, it's everywhere, right? It's the idea that men are stronger than women and men have a certain power over women. But you have these images, right, in the media. And how does that, I mean, there's so many images. There's obviously the liberated Western woman and her image all over the billboards everywhere. Then there's the oppressed Muslim woman and her images hidden behind closed doors. Now, all of these are then portrayed on media in different ways, right? How do people take that? What do they do with those images in their minds, Different societies, and how do they then treat different women, different children in different situations?
I think this is a really good point to bring up, just because the media plays such a massive role in every person's life. And, we don't realize it the way that it subconsciously infiltrates its way through not just us, but everyone who interacts with it. And, whether that's billboards or magazine covers or TV, exactly. Whatever it is. And, it's very dangerous that people who are in control of the media, especially of mainstream media, play on these binaries. I mean, of course, the media itself is an industry, mainstream media.
No, of course, you've got two sides, but we often look at, what is it? Isn't there a way of us actually using this on a positive note? I mean, oftentimes, and I mean, later we'll talk about that, but like I said, is there that element of, this is influencing us and our kids?
I mean, like I say, much of mainstream media, the structure of the media industry is definitely changing with the advancement of technology and all of that. But we still have to look at the fact that majority of mainstream media is, owned by certain groups who have certain agendas. For example, I mean, we can look at the American elections and look at the way that Donald Trump was sometimes covered in relation to Hillary Clinton. I mean, I'm not defending her. They're as problematic as one another. But, that whole gender disparity and the fact that certain binaries are constructed, to bring it back to, the example that you brought up, these binaries are constructed of, these dangerous othered Muslim women, and people play on the anxieties that come out of that, and that gives them, content for their newspapers. But the reason I'm bringing in this American election example is just to show that, it goes, like you say, patriarchy and, this drawing up of gender roles or whatever it is, it's in every space that we're in. And that means, it's not just in our community. And it's also not just in terms of violence behind closed doors. It's the fact that the entire world, you could say, is used to things being a certain way, where women, no matter what color or creed or whatever it is, are always the marginalized group. And so, it's as much as we need to be working in our own spaces and call out the problem in our own spaces, it's also a much bigger problem that we're constantly dealing with. And so we can't be dealing with it in isolation.
All right. Time for a break on this exclusive. And when we come back, we'll talk more about 16 Days of Activism. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to this ITV exclusive on this 25th of November, talking about the 16 Days of Activism. My guests, Anisa and Aisha, once again. It's been a very interesting chat so far. I mean, it's gone in all sorts of directions. And that often happens when we're talking about social issues, and something especially like, violence against women and children. In terms of of course, when you talk about violence against a certain gender, for example, there are roles that each one plays. Let's talk a bit about the roles of women in society. And I think there's so many different ways of looking at this. And we just like to look at the role of Muslim women, and then also the changeover and how things have evolved, and also how some things have just stayed the same. So in terms of what you see at the Islamic Airline, Anisa, the roles of women, I would like to ask you, what is it you see as the role of women in society at the moment? You've been there for what? 20 years at the Islamic Airline. And I mean, when we knew each other that time, it was different. 20 years ago, there were very few, women in media and all over. But now you're seeing Muslim women in so many different roles. But tell us about some of the roles you see in terms of the Islamic Airline. Some of the women you see come to the Islamic Airline having been violated in whatever way, whether it's emotionally, physically, in their homes or by others, in terms of how they are treated as women, and how does that, role, all these roles just fit into each other, because there's just so much.
I think it's an important topic, and again, it's something we can have a whole another program on,
Yes.
right? But in terms of the role of women, I think women wear many hats, and the viewers out there will agree
Yes.
that being a housewife, is most often referred to,
Yes.
comes with a woman having to wear very many hats.
I can attest to that one.
Right. Okay, but aside from your average middle class family, where the wife can drive and she carts her children up and down from school, being the educator, being the driver, being the
chef.
the cook.
Come on, give us chef, the chef, the chauffeur, those kind of titles,
In whatever words we'd like to use to define the roles.
Yes.
But I think women, we've used the word when we talk about marginalized. Women fall in that category, or we use a victim and women fall in that category. But I think we don't give women enough credit as being one of the most influential people in society, being the center of her home, influencing, and she doesn't recognize the amount of influence she has over raising her kids, because she's the one that spends most of the time with them.
Now can we just, I'm going to stop you there. Sorry for interrupting you, but there's a thinking amongst women, and I'd like to bring that up because I think that's so important in today's discussion, because we're talking about violence against women. The women who are in that position where they are either physically, mentally, or emotionally abused are in a position where they don't have a good sense of self, of course. They're in a space where men are then, or anyone for that matter, feels more powerful over them. And that's the truth, right? In terms of that woman doesn't feel that she is capable enough, she's powerful enough to be able to raise her children in the way that she knows is right. Now, as many women may be out there, raising the children to the best of their abilities, they may not believe this. So what is it, on the program that we could say to women that are listening, that say, what, the job, like you're saying, the job you are doing is one of the most important roles that you will ever cover, throughout your life, because you're bringing up the next generation. Whether they're girls or boys, you're bringing up a new generation of kids. And those girls will either grow up to have a good sense of self, and those boys will grow up to have a sense that, I'm not more powerful and I don't have the right to be rude, abusive, or ugly to anybody, much less my sisters, my mother, my future wife, anyone else in that category. And I think that's important, because we talk so much about, violence, but the emotional impact of that on ourselves, and then that technically, as we raise our children, we don't subconsciously affects the way we raise them and what we teach them and how we react to certain situations, So, I'd just like to highlight that point. You said victim, and, many women think they're victims, but I'd like to highlight the point in a way that says women are not, they're not weak, and we need to stop thinking that that's who we are, even if you're just at home, as some may say.
Okay, so when we look at the word victim as well, right? There's these two pictures that come to mind in my head when we talk about victim, right? And I don't necessarily see women as victims in a lot of contexts. I think a lot of women, if we really do a lot of soul searching, we'd recognize it at some point, are we really enablers, where we have embraced what's expected of us, not necessarily even Islamically, but more so culturally, because women are supposed to be good to her brothers, for example. And so from a young age, there's that value that's instilled that boys don't wash dishes and they don't clear the table, right? So from a very young age, it's inculcated
that he's better than you.
That's part of her function, and to be domesticated. Or even when our mothers tell us that no matter what profession you have, at the end of the day, your place is in the kitchen, kind of thing, right? So there is those messages that go out to children. But again, I'm going to say that, you know, still women have a very influential role to play in their families. And, you know, it's like when I raise my son, for example, to be I wouldn't say, okay, let's say, for example, I treat him as very special, okay, more so than my daughter. I'm sending across a message, right? That tomorrow when he gets married, he's going to expect that of his wife. And so today, I'm the mother.
And the enabler.
Right? Or I start out as the wife and I resent my mother-in-law because she raised her son to be so spoiled. But in a way, we're also sending across the same message, and that is perpetuating. And nowhere in Islam does it dictate to us that that's the role that we were supposed to play. Marriage in Islam is actually a very, very beautiful concept. It's a very beautiful practice. It's a form of ibadat. It's one where two people are supposed to raise a family together and raise their children together, and to teach them about love and about complementing one another and loving together in harmony, right? It was never supposed to be a competitive relationship where it's a power struggle, where it's male dominance over female role. So, you know, when I look at it in that context, what I'm saying is that family was supposed to be an environment that's conducive of good values, including respect for each other.
Respect for each other.
No matter who washes the dishes or who cooks the food or who cleans up the table after you eat, it doesn't make anyone less of a person because they're doing certain things. But the messages that we need to inculcate into our children also from a young age is very important. And that goes on to a discussion around parenting. But, you know, just on the whole, like I said, in going back to the bigger picture that I'd like to paint is that, you know, we associating women with being marginalized and victims. But when really, when a child is ill, they turn to their mother. When they, and this is not meant in any way to undermine the male role in the male function, because they also have an important place in society. Allah's also given them the associated responsibility and the associated rights with going, that's associated with being a Muslim man. But in the same way, women also have certain functions, roles, responsibilities, rights, and with those rights go responsibilities. So, you know, it's not in isolation that we need to look at. And then again, when I talk about the women being viewed as victims, you know, there's such a difference when I say I'm a victim, as opposed to, and a lot of women out there who've experienced domestic violence will vouch for this when they say, when I refer to myself as a victim, how does that make me feel? And when I say I'm a survivor, how does that make me feel? But it's about embracing that control. And again, I'm not going to sugarcoat it and saying it's as simple as that, because a lot of women or a lot of people out there will say, it's not as easy for me to say, but you know, Faiza, your husband treats you badly. Why don't you just leave him? It's not as simple as that. The reality is that a lot of women out there are stuck because they're either financially dependent, they've got nowhere to go, they've got children that they need to think about, and also the self-esteem. The self-esteem is a very it's the very core of a human being. You mentioned earlier about how one perceives themselves in terms of identity, and you said where a man would rather than come across and put himself out there as being a good person and a good Muslim and a generous person and a kind person to society, but yet in his home is something else. That also has to do with self-esteem. It has to do with the identity. The same with the woman. How she perceives herself is important. In an abusive relationship, the woman's self-esteem is so eroded that sometimes she loses confidence in her own ability to do. But then it's about helping her to restore that self-esteem before she can rescue herself or get herself out of. So what I'm saying is that I know we're talking about a lot of things, and I know we're also talking about, you know, in the bigger picture. But if we look at a woman in a particular situation, yes, she has the ability to step out of that. But it also takes a lot of work, and it's not as easy as one may seem, where people will say, but why don't you just?
Asha, when we come back, we'll talk to you more about what you think in terms of roles of, I guess, young women in society, what you see, and also I think bringing the issue of Western ideals and hijab and a little bit of that, obviously, on today's program, because it's, I think violence doesn't just come, it comes in so many different forms against women, and I think now with the West and what we're seeing also a new form of violence against women. So when we come back, we'll speak more to Aisha with regard to issues of, you know, women in different societies and oppression in different ways. We're taking a break. When we come back, more on this activism. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to this ITV exclusive. We're talking about the 16 days of activism. Aisha and Anisa, we've covered so many different angles in terms of this, and I think we could speak in so many different ways about the issue of violence against women and children. But I spoke to Anisa a bit about the roles of women in the way she sees it at the Islamic Airline, and I'd just like to bring it to you, Aisha. You're in a bit of a, if I may say, a younger society, a society of students, you're doing your masters, you're amongst, you know. What is it that many students see as the role of Muslim women? How is that, and how does it impact the way, you know, people deal with you as a Muslim woman, the interactions? And I'm sure people wonder, why am I asking this question when we're talking about violence? But I think there's so many different ways of making a person feel small, and that to me is violence in so many ways. So what is it like in terms of mainstream young society and what their reactions to young Muslim women, hijabbed women, that kind of thing in South Africa?
I think it's a really important conversation for us to have, especially because, you know, Muslim women are visible representatives of Islam. And I mean, you know, shukr alhamdulillah, in South Africa, we don't face as much discrimination and persecution as so many women across the world, especially in Western countries, especially now in Trump's America, are facing. And it's scary. It's so scary to think about. And, you know, we're so lucky that we don't have to deal with constant discrimination like that, and that's across the board. You know, not just in young youth spaces, but you know, even with older people. I've heard stories. I mean, I've heard of real life stories that are going on in those countries, and I think, like you say, we're very, very fortunate. But there's also, I mean, in terms of, I was wondering what it's like, you know, as a young student and stuff. No, definitely. And I think it's like I said, it's important to talk about these things, you know, to link back to what Anisa was talking about, gender roles. And, you know, I mean, we need to realize, as you've constantly been saying, all of, you know, the root of violence and all of that comes from power. You know, and from one person wanting to be in a position of power over another, and that, you know, that's in any state, any situation where there's injustice, whether it's, you know, a racist situation, a situation like what's going on in the Middle East, in Palestine, and in other persecuted nations, or something like, you know, the way that men behave towards women, and that's a general thing, and you know, that's something we need to be cognizant of. The fact that a domestic violence victim isn't just a beaten up woman who's sitting in a corner. A domestic violence victim can be anyone walking, it can be me or you or anyone walking amongst us, and we won't know. And same thing with a perpetrator. You know, it can be the guy that you're reading Salah next to in the masjid, and you don't know that he's going home and saying or doing whatever he's doing. So, you know, we really need to be cognizant of these things more than anything else. You know, the fact that behind what someone's appearance can lie so much, and sometimes we place more emphasis on appearance than anything else. You know, we automatically say, oh, look at this Muslim girl, she's wearing a scarf, mashallah, what a pious girl. Or, you know, look at this guy, he's got a beard and a kurta, mashallah, so pious. I mean, you know, Allah alone is the judge of how pious a person is. The way that you look does not define, you know, whether you are a good or a bad person. So in terms of, I mean, what you're saying in terms of you being visibly Muslim, I think that's really important because it comes up so much. Is that we cover up, we've got our scarves on, we've got our hijab on, and what are we portraying as Muslim women? For example, even towards our children, in a mall, for example,
we walking around and we visibly Muslim, and then we're screaming at our kids, for example, or we split our spouses, and perhaps your spouse is really rude to you in that, and people see that, they see that visible Muslim, and they see the reaction, and they put those two together and think, oh, this is what these people are. Or on the other hand, we follow the examples that have been set out in our Sunnah, and the way Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam behaved, the way the women behave, Khadija radiallahu anha, Aisha radiallahu anha, educated, well-educated women, being able to say, you know what, we've educated ourselves, we treat our spouses, our kids, everyone with respect, anyone around us, beggars especially, in terms of we visibly Muslim, how do we treat the people around us? So I think we've also got a very important role to play in terms of what we are portraying. So as much as we want to shift responsibility a lot of the time to perpetrators and all of that, I think, many a times we need to say, okay, let's sit back. I'm not in any way saying, what perpetrators should say, okay, because she behaved a certain way or she spoke a certain way, not at all. What I'm saying is for ourselves, even those who are not being abused or not, but being able to just empower ourselves and become better human beings each day, and then bring that into our homes and bring that to our children, and just show them that, we cover ourselves, we wear hijab, we wear kurtas, we have beards, and this is how we act, because this is what we were taught, and this is how we are meant to act. So I think in those, I just want to bring that in terms of, society and who we are and how they behave towards us. And hopefully, we'll have this in South Africa, where we always have the freedom to be able to wear our hijab without oppression. So inshallah, we'll always pray for that. Now, just bring it to Anisa as well. In terms of, there's not much time that we'll have left on the program, but in terms of the society, what can we do, to make the shift? So if you're in a position where you may not be abused, but okay, I know of someone that is going through this. I know of a child that is going through an abusive, in an abusive home. What are some of the shifts? What are some of the ways we could deal with this and then start shifting? And make a difference in society?
Okay, I think these different things that we can do, right? And it starts from very, very early. So I like to call it almost like early interventions and preventative stuff. And we mentioned a little bit about how we raise our children and the messages that we impart on them, but also checking our roles as parents first. And then obviously as we grow up. But I think when you mentioned in the last point about how we portray ourselves as Muslims, I think what's most important, more than that, is when we look in the mirror, who do we see? Do I see an angry human being that's been disillusioned and has become so hostile and resentful towards the world that I need to make someone belittle somebody else before I can feel better about myself?
That is the cycle, right? Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of internal work that you have to do and reflections about who you are and what is it that you want to do. So on the early interventions, it's about a little bit of prevention and reflection and introspection and all of that. On the secondary level, when abuse is taking place, we as Muslims need to ask ourselves, what message are we sending across? And I brought this up earlier about when we keep quiet, are we saying we're saving Muslims the shame of saying abuse is going on in our community? Or are we standing up against it and saying, but we will not tolerate it?
Because this is not deen.
Right. But also to be sensitive, because when we intervene in haste, we may create risk factors for the people that are abused. So if it's a child, do your homework first. Build a relationship, find out what's involved, where can they go for help, what support structures
So basically,
are there.
don't be hasty and just don't go putting it on social media, for example. And
that's an important thing with anything. We don't know boundaries, especially with social media. I think people's privacy is invaded. Even when it comes to trauma, we're disclosing things in inappropriate ways. Messages are getting across and out. So respect people's privacy, offer them help. Help them to access the support structures. There are support structures available, whether they be support groups, whether they be counseling services, whether they be going to the police station and reporting an abuse, whether they be going to a medical practitioner and collecting evidence about a particular...
Okay, so basically, because, we need to sum up the program, you're saying is that find out what's going on, do your homework, make sure you get to the right resources, right people involved before you actually interact and before you actually do anything about the situation.
That's very important. So you're meant to help, not cause more harm.
Certainly. Right, and then to finish off, Aisha, in terms of this activism, what is it that you feel, what is the message you need to give out? And also, as media, what do you think, how can you make a difference in the lives of those who are, suffering through this difficulty?
I think every person on this earth, has a responsibility towards being better and towards, if you see a situation that's problematic in any way, to call it out and do what you can to make a difference. And, you know, again, I want to highlight domestic violence or violence against women is not a beaten up woman in a corner. It starts with so many things, like Anisa was saying, you know, things like low self-esteem, so many of these issues. So, you know, really, so much of the time we can check ourselves when it comes to the way that we interact with people and the way that, you know, we don't always realize how it subconsciously is picked up by other people. And you know, to link that back to what we were talking about, you know, as Muslim women, our role in society generally and our responsibilities. You know, a lot of the time as Muslim women, we're only looked at in our proximity to men. You know, so she's this one's daughter, she's this one's wife, she's this one's mother. When, you know, it doesn't matter what context you're in or what situation you're in, you are so much more than just that. You are so much more than just someone's wife or daughter or mother. And, you know, a lot of the time in our community, people love to say, no, but Islam is not oppressive in any way. And people love to bring up the example of, you know, Aisha and Khadija radiallahu anh. And, you know, 100%, that's completely valid, but we don't always act on it. So we want to bring that up, but we don't want to send our girls to get educated further. Or, you know, things like that. So really to just, you know, be conscious of the role that we can play all the time, because you always have a role to play. And also for Muslim women, you know, I just want to really highlight the fact that in whatever situation you're in, because a lot of the time we find this, that someone will always try and make you feel like you're not enough. And this goes for women generally, because of the fact that, you know, we live in a patriarchal world. It's a reality. Patriarchy is a form of violence that is manifesting itself all the time in every space. And we've internalized it to such extent that, you know, we've normalized it. And so sometimes to even wake up and say, I am enough, and, you know, I am doing something, and I am not an invisible person. Or, you know, just because a person has created conditions where, you know, they've made it that I'm completely dependent on them for everything, that doesn't mean that I'm nothing. And I think that's something that a lot of people need to hear and remember and realize. And, you know, so basically what I just want to end off with is saying that, yes, you know, as a member of the media, I have a responsibility, definitely, you know, to use my voice and platform to advocate for the right thing. But it goes so much further than just that. It's not just members of the media who have a responsibility. It's every single person.
Right. Jazakallah, Anisa, Aisha, for a very interesting discussion on today's program. That brings us to the end of this program for this ITV exclusive. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.